The nerve of some people never ceases to amaze me. I'm standing in my brand new beach house kitchen, still admiring the pristine white cabinets and granite countertops, when my phone rings. It's Crystal, my daughter-in-law, and from her tone, you'd think she was doing me the favor of a lifetime. "Margaret, we've decided to spend Christmas at your beach house. Me and my 17 relatives will be arriving Christmas Eve and staying through New Year's. Have everything ready for our arrival. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Now, let me back up and tell you how we got here. 3 months ago, I bought this gorgeous 4-bedroom beach house in Myrtle Beach. It wasn't just an impulse purchase, though my son David seemed to think it was when I told him. At 72, I've earned the right to spend my retirement savings however I choose. The house serves dual purposes, a peaceful getaway for me, and a rental property that brings in decent income during peak season. The real estate agent, a sweet young woman named Beth, had shown me at least 15 properties before I found this gem. "Mrs. Patterson," she'd said, "this one has excellent rental potential. Ocean view, modern amenities, and it's in a prime location." She was right. I'd already booked solid through March with tourists willing to pay premium rates for the privilege. David hadn't been thrilled about my extravagant spending, as he called it. "Mom, do you really need a beach house? What if you fall? What if there's a hurricane?" Always the worrier, my son. Takes after his father in that regard. But I've been managing my own affairs for the 7 years since Harold passed. And I'm not about to stop now. Crystal, on the other hand, had been nothing but sugar and spice when I first told her about the purchase. "Oh, Margaret, how wonderful. We'll have to come visit sometime." That sometime had apparently become right now, with zero consultation and maximum presumption. 17 people, Crystal? I managed to say into the phone, though my grip was getting tighter. That's quite a crowd. Well, yes, my parents, my siblings, their children, a few cousins. You know, family. The way she said family suggested I should be grateful for the invasion. We figured since you have all that space just sitting there, why waste it on strangers? Strangers who pay me $1,200 a week, I thought, but didn't say. Yet. "And you want to stay for 8 days?" I asked, calculating rapidly. That would be Christmas week, the most expensive rental period of the entire year. "Is that a problem? I thought you'd be thrilled to have family around for the holidays." Crystal's voice had developed that edge it gets when she's not getting her way immediately. I looked around my beautiful, spotless kitchen and imagined 18 people descending on it like locusts. Crumbs ground into my hardwood floors. Sand tracked through every room. My carefully arranged furniture moved around to accommodate sleeping arrangements I hadn't agreed to. But mostly, I thought about the rental income I'd be losing, and the sheer audacity of assuming I'd be their free hotel for 8 days. "Of course, dear," I said sweetly. "I'll have everything ready." After hanging up, I sat in my favorite armchair overlooking the ocean and smiled for the first time all day. Oh, I'd have everything ready, all right. Crystal called back the next morning with more demands disguised as helpful suggestions. "Margaret, I've been thinking about sleeping arrangements. My parents will need the master bedroom since Dad has back problems. My sister Jenny has 3 kids, so they'll need the 2 guest rooms. The rest of us can figure something out." I listened to her reorganize my house like she was Napoleon planning a military campaign, sipping my coffee and watching dolphins play in the surf outside my window. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was giving away my bedroom while I was paying for the privilege. "What about meals?" Crystal continued. "I assume you'll handle most of the cooking since you know the kitchen and all. Mom doesn't travel well, and Jenny will be exhausted dealing with her kids." Ah, yes, I thought. Let's add personal chef to my list of unpaid services. "Don't worry about groceries," she added generously. "We'll chip in for those. Maybe a few $100s should cover it for everyone." A few $100s to feed 18 people for 8 days during the holidays? My weekly grocery budget for one person was already approaching $150, but I just made pleasant agreeing sounds while mentally calculating exactly how much this little family reunion was going to cost me. That afternoon, I called my accountant, Patricia. We've been working together for 12 years, ever since Harold passed and left me to figure out our finances alone. Patricia never talks down to me or suggests I need a man to help with complicated money matters. "Patricia, hypothetical question," I said. If I were to rent my beach house to 18 people for 8 days during Christmas week, what would be fair market rate? She laughed. Margaret, nothing hypothetical about that tone. Christmas week? Prime beachfront property? You're looking at minimum $2,000 for the week, probably closer to $2,500 with that many people. Maybe more with all the amenities you've described. $2,500. I did the math quickly. That's what Crystal's family gathering was going to cost me in lost rental income, not counting my additional expenses for food, utilities, cleaning, and my own displaced sleeping arrangements. Thanks, Patricia. You've been very helpful. Margaret, whatever you're planning, I have a feeling it's going to be interesting. That evening, I researched local hotel rates for comparison. The Marriott was charging $450 a night for a 2-bedroom suite during Christmas week. Even the modest Hampton Inn was getting $250 for a standard room. I printed everything out and filed it neatly in a folder labeled Christmas 2024. Then I went online and ordered a small portable printer, some official-looking invoice templates, and a credit card reader that would work with my phone. If Crystal wanted to turn my beach house into a hotel, then we were going to run it like a business. The best part? She'd given me 3 weeks to prepare, plenty of time to get everything properly organized. I fell asleep that night listening to the waves and planning what was going to be a very educational holiday for my daughter-in-law. 3 weeks later, I was ready. Crystal's family convoy started arriving on Christmas Eve afternoon. 5 cars pulling into my circular driveway like they owned the place. I watched from my living room window as they unloaded enough luggage for a month-long expedition, children running everywhere, adults shouting instructions over the ocean breeze. Crystal emerged from the first car wearing a white sundress that probably cost more than most people's car payments. Her parents followed, Henry and Susan Walsh, both looking exactly like the entitled, demanding people I'd expected. Crystal's sister Jenny corralled 3 children who immediately started tracking sand across my pristine entryway before anyone had even been formally invited inside. "Margaret!" Crystal called out, arms spread wide like she was greeting an old friend instead of commandeering my property. "Isn't this perfect? Everyone's so excited to be here." She hugged me with the kind of embrace that looks warm but feels calculating. "I hope you don't mind. We stopped and picked up some groceries. Just the basics. I'm sure you'll want to supplement for the real cooking." The basics turned out to be 2 bags of chips, a case of beer, and some hot dogs. For 18 people. For 8 days. My mental calculator was already running overtime. "Where should we put everything?" Henry Walsh demanded, hauling a suitcase the size of a small refrigerator up my front steps. "Susan needs to lie down immediately. Her arthritis is acting up from the drive." "Of course," I said pleasantly. "Let me show everyone to their accommodations." I led them through my house with the practiced demeanor of a professional hotel manager. "Henry and Susan, you'll be in the Ocean View Master Suite," I announced, opening the door to my bedroom. This features a king-size bed, private bathroom with jacuzzi tub, and direct access to the deck. Susan immediately began rearranging my personal items on the dresser. "This will do nicely. Henry, bring my medications from the car." "Jenny," I continued, "you and your family have the family suite, 2 adjoining rooms with bunk beds for the children." The kids were already jumping on my guest room beds, their sandy feet leaving marks on my white comforter. Crystal raised an eyebrow. "You're being very formal about everything, Margaret." "I want everyone to feel welcome," I replied with my sweetest smile. "This is, after all, a full-service accommodation." By 6 o'clock, my house had been completely transformed. Towels everywhere, television volume cranked up, someone's teenager playing music in the bathroom. Crystal's cousin had already clogged the garbage disposal with shrimp shells, and her nephew had broken one of my decorative lighthouse figurines. "Margaret!" Crystal called from the kitchen. "What's for dinner?" "Everyone's getting hungry." I found 18 people spread throughout my living areas, all looking at me expectantly. Susan was complaining about the room temperature. Henry was demanding the Wi-Fi password for the 3rd time. Jenny's youngest was crying because someone had eaten his goldfish crackers. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone and the small credit card reader I'd purchased, "before we discuss dinner, I have some paperwork to handle." I reached into my carefully organized folder and pulled out 18 professionally printed invoices, each one personalized with the guest's name and specific accommodation details. "What's this?" Crystal asked, her voice suspicious as I handed her the first invoice. The beautiful thing about preparation is that it gives you confidence. And right now, I'd never felt more confident in my life. "What's this?" Crystal repeated, staring at the invoice in her hand like it might bite her. "Your accommodation charges," I replied calmly, handing out invoices to each bewildered family member. "The Ocean View Master Suite is $300 per night. The family suites are $250 each. The other rooms vary depending on amenities." The silence was spectacular. 18 people frozen in various states of shock, holding pieces of paper that clearly itemized 8 days of charges plus applicable taxes and fees. Henry Walsh spoke first, his face turning an alarming shade of red. "Is this some kind of joke?" "Not at all. This is a professional vacation rental property, Mr. Walsh. You're staying in premium accommodations during peak season." Crystal's voice went up an octave. "Margaret, we're family." "Indeed you are, and I'm sure you understand that family doesn't take advantage of each other." I kept my tone light and pleasant, as if we were discussing the weather. "The total for your group comes to $5,100 for the 8-day stay. That's actually quite reasonable. I've given you the family discount." Jenny's husband Brad started laughing, but not the good kind. "This is insane. We drove 6 hours to be with family for Christmas, and you're treating us like customers?" "You made reservations to stay at my property for 8 days during the holidays," I corrected gently. "I've provided exactly what was requested. Premium beachfront accommodations, full house access, and concierge-level service." Crystal was scanning her invoice more carefully now, and I could see the exact moment she spotted the additional charges. "What's this? Cleaning fee? Resort fee? Damage deposit?" "Standard hospitality industry charges. The cleaning fee covers post-departure deep cleaning. The resort fee covers premium Wi-Fi, cable television, and access to all house amenities. The damage deposit is refundable, assuming no property damage occurs." Susan Walsh's voice cut through the chaos. "This is outrageous. We're leaving." "That's certainly your choice," I agreed pleasantly. "Though I should mention that Christmas Eve hotel availability in Myrtle Beach is extremely limited, and rates will be considerably higher than what I'm charging." I'd done my research, of course. The cheapest motel room within 50 miles was going for $350 a night, if you could find one. Most hotels had been booked solid for months. Crystal was furiously texting someone, probably David, trying to get him to intervene. "This is crazy, Margaret. We can't afford this." "I understand unexpected expenses can be challenging," I said sympathetically. "I accept cash, credit cards, or payment plans. We can set up a monthly installment arrangement if needed." Henry was now actively cursing, using words I haven't heard since my late husband's construction days. His wife was demanding he call lawyers, as if there were legal remedies for being charged fair market rates for premium accommodations. "Listen," Brad said, clearly trying to be the reasonable mediator. "Can't we work something out? Maybe we could help with groceries, pitch in for utilities." I pulled out my second folder, the one labeled Additional Services. "Absolutely. I offer full catering services. Breakfast is $45 per person per day. Lunch is $35. Dinner ranges from $50 to $75 depending on the menu. I also provide housekeeping, laundry service, and grocery shopping for additional fees." The mathematical reality was finally sinking in. Crystal grabbed a pen and started adding numbers. "This would cost us more than going to Disney World." "Disney World doesn't offer oceanfront accommodation or personalized service," I replied. "But I understand it's a significant investment." My phone rang at that perfect moment. "Excuse me," I said, stepping into the kitchen. "Hello? Mrs. Patterson, this is Jennifer from Coastal Rentals. I know it's last minute, but we have a corporate client desperate for a large property Christmas week. They're offering $3,500 for 5 days, full payment up front." I listened to her pitch while watching Crystal's family argue in my living room, their voices getting louder and more desperate by the minute. "I'll call you back in 10 minutes, I told Jennifer. When I returned to the living room, the mood had shifted from outraged to calculating. They were hudding together, whispering urgently. Crystal looked up at me with the fake smile she'd perfected for manipulating David. "Margaret, we need to discuss this reasonably." Oh, this was going to be interesting. "Let's be reasonable about this." "Margaret," Crystal said, her voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that makes your teeth hurt. "We're family. Surely we can work out some kind of arrangement." I settled into my favorite armchair, the one with the perfect view of both the ocean and the chaos unfolding in my living room. 17 people were staring at me like I'd personally canceled Christmas, which in a way, I suppose I had. "I'm listening," I said pleasantly. Henry Walsh stepped forward, puffing up his chest like he was about to deliver a corporate presentation. "Look, Mrs. Patterson, we understand you've made an investment in this property. But charging family members commercial rates is just wrong. It's not what family does." "You're absolutely right, Henry," I agreed, watching his face brighten with premature victory. "Family doesn't impose on each other without permission. Family doesn't assume they can take over someone's property for free. Family doesn't demand someone else cook, clean, and provide unpaid hotel services." His smile faded faster than a beach tan in winter. Crystal tried a different approach. "Margaret, I think there's been a misunderstanding. When I called about Christmas, I assumed you'd want family around. I thought you'd be lonely." The audacity was breathtaking. "How thoughtful of you to worry about my loneliness. Though I'm curious, when exactly did you plan to inform me about 17 guests?" "I told you 17 relatives were coming. On 3 days' notice, Crystal, after I'd already turned down legitimate paying customers." Jenny finally spoke up, bouncing her crying toddler. "This is ridiculous. We can't afford hotel rates for 18 people. Mom, Dad, can you talk sense into her?" Susan Walsh, who'd been suspiciously quiet while rearranging my bedroom, emerged with a new strategy. "Margaret, dear, I think you're having some kind of episode. This obsession with money isn't healthy for someone your age. Maybe we should call David." "The crazy old lady card. How original." "By all means, call David," I said. "I'm sure he'll be fascinated to learn that his wife planned an 8-day vacation for 18 people without consulting either the host or her own husband." Crystal's face went pale. In all her scheming, she apparently hadn't considered that David might not approve of her Christmas surprise. Brad was still trying to negotiate. "Look, what if we split the difference? We'll pay for groceries, help with cooking, clean up after ourselves." "That's very generous," I replied. "Housekeeping services are an additional $75 per day, regardless of who performs them. Cooking is extra. Groceries for 18 people for 8 days will run approximately $800, assuming we're not talking steak dinners every night." I could see them doing math in their heads, and none of the numbers were working in their favor. Crystal's teenage nephew, who'd been texting frantically throughout this entire conversation, looked up with panic in his eyes. "Aunt Crystal, I checked online. There's literally nowhere else to stay. Everything's booked." "There's a KOA campground about 30 miles inland," I offered helpfully. "They might have tent sites available." The mental image of Henry and Susan Walsh spending Christmas in a tent was apparently too much for everyone. Susan started crying, the manipulative kind that's supposed to make you feel guilty. "I can't believe you're doing this to us on Christmas Eve. After everything we've been through this year. What exactly have you been through?" I asked with genuine curiosity. The question seemed to stump her. "Well, things. Difficult things." Crystal jumped back into negotiation mode. "Margaret, what if we paid half? $2,500? That's more than reasonable." I pulled out my phone and showed them the call log. "I have someone offering $3,500 for 5 days. Your 8-day stay would cost me a minimum of $5,000 in lost revenue, plus my personal displacement costs." The room went quiet, except for the sound of waves and one crying child. Henry was reaching for his wallet with shaking hands. "Fine, we'll pay your ridiculous rates, but this destroys our relationship forever." I smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. "Henry, if our relationship was based on you taking advantage of my generosity, then it was already destroyed." But I wasn't quite finished with my Christmas lesson yet. Watching Henry Walsh count out $5,000 in cash was like watching someone discover gravity, painful, inevitable, and educational. His hands shook as he placed each $100 bill on my coffee table, muttering under his breath about highway robbery and family loyalty. Crystal stood behind him, her face cycling through anger, disbelief, and something that might have been respect if I didn't know her better. The rest of the family gathered around like witnesses at a car accident, unable to look away from the financial carnage. "There," Henry said, slapping down the final bill. "Are you satisfied?" I'm satisfied that we have a clear business arrangement, I replied, gathering the money with the same casual efficiency I'd use to collect mail. Now, shall we discuss dinner? The collective groan was music to my ears. As I mentioned earlier, I offer full catering services. However, since this is Christmas Eve and your family, I'm prepared to make an exception. I paused just long enough to see hope creep back into their faces. I'll allow you to use my kitchen to prepare your own meals. Allow us? Jenny's voice cracked. Kitchen use is normally an additional fee, but I'm waiving it for the holidays. I handed her a laminated card I'd prepared earlier. Here are the kitchen rules. No dishes left in the sink overnight. Clean as you go. Replace anything you break. The garbage disposal is off limits after the shrimp incident. Susan Walsh, who'd been surprisingly quiet during the payment collection, suddenly perked up. Wait a minute. If we're paying hotel rates, don't we get hotel services? Room service? Daily housekeeping? I smiled at her with the patience of a kindergarten teacher explaining basic concepts. Those are additional services. Susan, your base rate covers accommodation only. Would you like to see the service menu? Before she could answer, my phone rang again. David's name flashed on the screen, and every eye in the room focused on me like I was about to answer a call from the president. Hello, sweetheart, I said warmly, putting the call on speaker. Merry Christmas Eve. Mom, what the hell is going on? Crystal just texted me some crazy story about you charging them to stay at your house. The silence in my living room was so complete, I could hear seagulls outside. I'm running my vacation rental business professionally. David, Crystal booked accommodation for 18 people during peak season. I've provided exactly what was requested. But Mom, it's family. Yes, it is. And your wife decided to plan an 8-day vacation for 18 people without consulting you, me, or considering that I might have other plans for my property during the most profitable week of the year. I could hear David processing this information. He's a good man, my son, but he's always been a little blind to Crystal's manipulative tendencies. Crystal didn't discuss this with you? He asked, and I could hear the temperature dropping in his voice. 3 days' notice for 18 people, David. I had to cancel paying customers. The pause that followed was telling. Crystal, is this true? Every person in my living room suddenly found the floor fascinating. Crystal's face had gone from pale to green. I thought it would be a nice surprise, she stammered. For the family. You planned an 8-day vacation for 18 people without asking me, without checking our budget, without even confirming with Mom first? The tide was turning, and everyone could sense it. David, I said gently, your wife has paid for their accommodations. Everyone is welcome to stay and enjoy their Christmas vacation. I'm simply running my property like the business it is. How much did this cost us? David's voice was dangerously quiet. Crystal whispered something unintelligible. How much, Crystal? $5,000, Henry answered when Crystal couldn't find her voice. The silence from David's end of the call stretched so long, I wondered if we'd been disconnected. Mom, he finally said, I'll call you back. Crystal and I need to have a conversation. After I hung up, the room remained frozen. 18 people afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid to discover what other surprises I might have in store. I looked around at their shell-shocked faces and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete and total control of my own life. Now then, I said pleasantly, who's hungry? The next morning brought the kind of chaos that makes you appreciate living alone. I woke up at 6:30 to the sound of someone running water, cabinet doors slamming, and what appeared to be a full-scale argument happening in my kitchen. Where are the coffee filters? Jenny's voice carried up the stairs. How should I know? This isn't my house. That was Brad, sounding about as cheerful as a root canal. I took my time getting dressed, applying my makeup with extra care, and selecting a crisp white blouse that said, Professional Hotel Manager, rather than Pushover Grandmother. By the time I made it downstairs, World War III was in full swing. My pristine kitchen looked like a hurricane had blown through it. Cereal boxes scattered across the granite counters, milk spilled on the floor, someone's toddler finger painting with what appeared to be strawberry jam on my cabinet doors. Crystal stood in the middle of it all, still in her silk pajamas, looking like she was about to have a complete breakdown. Oh good, you're awake, Susan Walsh announced from my kitchen table, where where she'd set up what appeared to be a mobile pharmacy. "We need to discuss the coffee situation. This generic brand you have is undrinkable." I surveyed the destruction with the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen worse. Though honestly, I wasn't sure I had. "Good morning, everyone," I said pleasantly. "I see you've discovered the kitchen." Crystal looked up from where she was trying to figure out my coffee maker with the desperate intensity of someone defusing a bomb. "Margaret, do you have any real cream? This powdered stuff is awful." "There's a grocery store about 2 miles down the beach road," I replied helpfully. "They open at 7. Henry emerged from my pantry holding an empty cereal box. "This is ridiculous. 18 people can't survive on 1 box of cornflakes and some stale crackers." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "Would you like me to arrange grocery delivery? I work with several local services." The hope in their faces was almost touching. "The delivery fee is $75, plus a 20% service charge, plus the cost of groceries and tip for the driver." I pulled out yet another laminated service menu. "Or you can visit the grocery store yourselves. I have detailed directions and recommendations for the best local markets." Crystal's phone had been buzzing constantly since 7 a.m. David, I assumed, working through his feelings about his wife's surprise vacation planning. She'd been declining his calls, which told me everything I needed to know about how that conversation was likely to go. "Margaret," Susan said, with the kind of forced patience people use with difficult children, "we need to clear the air about something. This whole charging family members thing is causing unnecessary stress for everyone." I poured myself coffee from the personal coffee maker I'd moved to my bedroom the night before, because I'm not stupid, and settled in to listen. "Family takes care of family," she continued. "That's how we were raised. You help each other out, especially during the holidays." "I completely agree," I said. "That's exactly why I'm providing professional-grade accommodations instead of telling you to find a hotel." Jenny looked up from wiping jam off her toddler's face. "But charging us like we're strangers? That's not family. Jenny, when was the last time you invited me to stay at your house for 8 days? When was the last time any of you offered to help with my expenses, my time, or my needs?" The question hung in the air like morning fog. Family is a two-way relationship. You've been treating me like a free service provider, not like family. Crystal's phone buzzed again. This time she answered it, stepping out onto the deck where we could all see her through the glass doors, having what appeared to be an increasingly heated conversation with my son. Henry decided to try a different approach. "Look, Margaret, we understand you're upset about the short notice, but punishing us financially isn't the answer. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm charging fair market rates for premium services during peak season. The punishment would be if I'd said no and sent you all to sleep in your cars." Susan snorted. "Fair market rates. You're taking advantage of a captive audience. The same way you took advantage of my hospitality," I replied evenly. Through the glass doors, we could see Crystal's conversation with David becoming more animated. Her hands were flying around, her voice rising even though we couldn't hear the words. Finally, she hung up and stood staring at the ocean for several long minutes before coming back inside. "David wants to talk to you," she said quietly, handing me her phone. The room went silent except for the sound of waves and children arguing over the last of the cereal. "Hello, sweetheart," I said. "Mom, I owe you an apology. Crystal finally told me the whole truth about how this trip was planned." I could hear the strain in his voice. "What did she tell you?" "That she never asked your permission. That she just assumed you'd be available and happy to host everyone for free. That she never even considered the financial impact on you or the fact that you run this as a business." Crystal was watching me with the expression of someone waiting for a jury verdict. "She also told me about the rental income you're losing and how much it costs to feed and house 18 people. David's voice was getting steadier, more resolved. "Mom, I had no idea. If I'd known, I never would have let this happen. I know that, David. Crystal's going to apologize to you properly, and we're going to figure out how to make this right." I looked around the room at 17 people hanging on every word of our conversation. "David, everyone has already paid for their accommodations. The business arrangement is settled. What happens next is up to all of you." But what happened next was going to surprise everyone, including me. What happened next was that Crystal started crying. Not the manipulative tears she'd tried earlier, but the ugly, honest kind that comes when someone realizes they've made a spectacular mistake. "I'm sorry," she sobbed into her hands. I just wanted everyone to have a nice Christmas together, and I thought you'd be happy to have us all here. The thing about genuine remorse is that it's completely different from strategic tears. Everyone in the room could sense the difference, including me. Crystal, I said gently, sit down. She collapsed into one of my kitchen chairs like a deflated balloon. Her perfect hair was a mess, her silk pajamas wrinkled, and her makeup had migrated to interesting new locations on her face. I've never organized anything this big before, she continued. David always handles the planning, the budgets, the logistics. I just wanted to do something special for once, something that would bring everyone together. Henry and Susan exchanged glances that suggested this was the first they'd heard about their daughter's lack of planning experience. When did you first think about having Christmas here? I asked. 3 weeks ago. I was talking to Mom about how scattered everyone's been since Grandma Rose died, how we never all get together anymore. And then I remembered you mentioning the beach house, and it seemed perfect, big enough for everyone. Beautiful location, and you're always saying, family is important. The pieces were starting to come together. Rose Walsh, Crystal's grandmother, had died 6 months ago. She'd been the family matriarch, the one who organized all the gatherings, kept everyone connected. Her death had left a gap that Crystal was apparently trying to fill. So you called everyone and invited them, I said. I called everyone and told them we were having Christmas at Margaret's beach house, she corrected miserably. I never said I'd asked you first. I just assumed it would be fine. Jenny was staring at her sister with growing understanding. Crystal, you told us Margaret had invited us. You said she was excited about hosting everyone. I know. I panicked when everyone started saying yes, but then I figured once Margaret saw how happy everyone was, she'd be glad we came. The psychology was becoming clearer. Crystal had painted herself into a corner with good intentions and poor execution, then doubled down instead of admitting her mistake. And the money? Henry asked quietly. Crystal's face crumpled further. I never thought about money. I just assumed family helps family, right? Margaret has this beautiful house just sitting here. We needed somewhere to gather. It seemed obvious. Susan was looking at her daughter like she was seeing her clearly for the first time. Crystal, honey, you can't just assume someone will host 18 people for free, even family. I know that now, Crystal wailed. But by the time I realized what I'd done, everyone had made plans, taken time off work, driven here from 3 different states. I couldn't cancel Christmas. The room was quiet except for her crying and the distant sound of waves. Everyone was processing this revelation, that Crystal wasn't a master manipulator, just someone who'd made a huge mistake and then panicked. Brad, who'd been silent through most of this drama, finally spoke up. So what now? We're here. We've paid. Christmas is tomorrow. I looked around the room at these 17 people who'd driven hundreds of miles to be together, who'd spent their Christmas money on my unexpected hotel rates, who were stuck in a situation none of them had asked for. Now we have Christmas, I said simply. Crystal looked up with red, swollen eyes. What do you mean? I mean you wanted a family Christmas, and you're going to have one. But we're going to do it right. I walked to my junk drawer and pulled out a yellow legal pad and pen. First, we're going to organize this chaos. Jenny, you're good with kids. You're in charge of child logistics and activities. Brad, you seem practical. You handle grocery shopping and meal coordination. Henry, you and Susan work out sleeping arrangements that actually make sense. I could see hope creeping back into their faces. Crystal, you're going to call David back and have him come down here. Then you're going to learn how to actually organize a family gathering instead of just wishing one into existence. What about you? Susan asked. I smiled, feeling something I hadn't expected. Genuine anticipation. I'm going to teach you all how to run a proper family Christmas. Consider it a crash course in hospitality management. But first, I had one more surprise for them. The surprise was in my garage, wrapped in old moving blankets and waiting for exactly this kind of moment. I'd been saving it since I bought the house, not sure when or if I'd ever have occasion to use it. Everyone outside, I announced after we'd finished organizing the morning chaos. I want to show you something. 17 confused people trooped out to my driveway, still in various states of pajamas and morning hair. I led them around to the 3-car garage and hit the button to raise the center door. Inside, covered in blankets, was a 12-foot Christmas tree. Oh my gosh, Jenny breathed. I'd bought it from a local tree farm 2 weeks ago, back when I was planning to spend Christmas alone with a good book and some expensive wine. The tree lot owner, a sweet man named Carl, had convinced me that a woman with a house this size needed a tree to match. I figured if I was going to spend my first Christmas in a beach house, I should do it properly, I explained, pulling away the blankets to reveal a perfectly shaped Fraser fir. But it's a bit much for one person. The children were already circling the tree like sharks around a life raft. Even Henry looked impressed, despite himself. "We'll need ornaments," Susan said practically. "Already handled." I opened a series of storage containers I'd positioned along the garage wall. Lights, ornaments, garland, tree topper, the works. I may have gotten a little carried away at the Christmas store. Crystal was staring at the tree with the expression of someone who just watched the Christmas miracle happen in real time. "You planned this?" "I planned to have a tree. I didn't plan to have 17 people to help decorate it." Brad was already examining the tree stand situation. "This is going to be a project. We'll need to get it through the front door, set it up in the living room, probably move some furniture." "That's what family is for," I said, surprised to hear myself mean it. The next 3 hours were controlled chaos of the best kind. Henry and Brad worked out the logistics of moving furniture and positioning the tree. Jenny organized the children into decoration teams. Susan, who apparently had opinions about ornament placement that would make Martha Stewart weep, took charge of the actual decorating process. Crystal, meanwhile, was on the phone with David, and from what I could overhear, the conversation was going much better than expected. "He's coming down tonight," she announced when she hung up. "He said he wants to see this miraculous Christmas transformation for himself." "And?" I prompted, sensing there was more. "And he said he's proud of me for finally admitting when I'm wrong instead of doubling down." She paused, looking embarrassed. "Apparently, it's something I do." Susan snorted from her position near the tree. "Something you do? Honey, it's your signature move." By afternoon, my living room had been transformed into something that belonged on a Christmas card. The tree dominated the space, perfectly lit and decorated with a combination of my new ornaments and some family heirloom pieces that Susan had apparently packed just in case. More importantly, the house had filled with something I hadn't experienced in years. The comfortable chaos of family working together toward a common goal. "You know," Henry said, collapsing into my armchair after we'd finished hanging the last garland, "this is nice. Different from what we usually do, but nice." "What do you usually do?" I asked. "Fight about whose house to use, argue about the menu, stress about money, complain about travel arrangements," Jenny listed with disturbing accuracy. "Usually by Christmas Day, half of us aren't speaking to the other half. This year, we got all the fighting out of the way on Christmas Eve," Crystal said with a weak smile. "Plus, we have professional accommodations and a dedicated event coordinator," Susan added, gesturing toward me. I was starting to see these people differently. Not as invaders or freeloaders, but as a family, struggling to figure out how to be together without their matriarch. They were grieving and lost, and trying to recreate something precious, without really understanding how it had worked in the first place. "Tell me about Rose," I said. The change in the room was immediate. 17 faces softened with memory and loss. "Grandma Rose could organize anything," Crystal said quietly. "She knew exactly how many people were coming, what everyone liked to eat, who needed to sleep where. She made it all look effortless. She also had 40 years of practice," Susan pointed out. "You're trying to replace someone who'd been doing this since before you were born." "But she'd be happy we're all together," Jenny added. "That's what mattered to her most." I looked around my living room at these people who'd accidentally stumbled into exactly what Rose Walsh would have wanted for them. But tomorrow was Christmas Day, and I had one final lesson to teach them about what family really means. Christmas morning dawned with the kind of spectacular sunrise that makes you believe in magic. I was up early, as usual, sitting on my deck with coffee and watching the waves when I heard the first stirrings of life from inside the house. By 7 a.m., chaos was brewing again, but this time it was the good kind. Children's voices, adults trying to organize gift distribution, someone burning something in the kitchen that was probably supposed to be breakfast. I'd made a decision during my quiet morning moments. Today was going to be about more than just surviving Crystal's planning disaster. Today was going to be about showing this family what they were capable of when they worked together, instead of against each other. "Good morning, everyone," I called out as I came inside to find my living room full of people in various states of Christmas morning excitement. Crystal was sitting on the floor near the tree, looking calmer than I'd seen her since she arrived. David's car in the driveway explained the change in her demeanor. "David," I hugged my son, genuinely happy to see him. "How was the drive?" "Educational," he said, glancing at his wife with a mixture of exasperation and affection. Crystal and I had some very interesting conversations about communication and assumptions. "And apologizing," Crystal added quietly. "Lots of apologizing." The morning proceeded with the kind of organized gift chaos that only happens when you have this many people in one space. But something was different from the previous day's tension. People were making an effort to include everyone, to share space, to work together instead of competing for attention or resources. Around noon, as we were cleaning up wrapping paper debris, Susan made an announcement that surprised everyone. "Henry and I want to say something," she began, standing in the middle of my living room with the kind of formal posture she probably used for important occasions. "Yesterday, we were angry about the hotel arrangement. We felt taken advantage of, manipulated. Everyone went quiet, unsure where this was heading. But we've been thinking about it overnight, and we owe Margaret an apology." Susan's voice was steady, sincere. "She's right. We did take advantage of her. We assumed she'd be grateful for our company, that she'd want to cook and clean and host us for free just because we're family." Henry nodded, looking uncomfortable but determined. "The truth is, none of us have ever hosted Christmas for 18 people. We have no idea what it costs, what it takes, how much work is involved. We just showed up and expected Margaret to handle everything." "Like Rose used to do," Jenny added quietly. "Exactly like Rose used to do," Susan agreed. "But Rose chose to take on that role. She planned for it, budgeted for it, organized her whole year around it. We never asked Margaret if she wanted that responsibility." Crystal was crying again, but quietly this time. "I just wanted everyone to be together. And we are together," Susan said gently. "But because Margaret was strong enough to set boundaries, not because she let us walk all over her." David spoke up from his position on the couch. "Mom, I'm proud of you for standing your ground. I know it couldn't have been easy." "Actually," I said, surprising myself with the admission, "it was easier than I expected. Once I decided to stop being a victim, everything else fell into place." Brad looked around the room thoughtfully. "So what happens next year? Do we want to do this again?" The question hung in the air like morning mist. "If we do," I said slowly, "we plan it properly. 6 months advance notice. Clear expectations about costs and responsibilities. Shared decision-making about menus and activities. And we take turns hosting," Jenny added. "This shouldn't all fall on one person every year." Crystal looked up with something that might have been hope. "Would you really consider hosting us again? After everything that happened?" I looked around my living room at these 17 people who'd accidentally taught me something important about family, about boundaries, and about what happens when you stop accepting unacceptable behavior. "On one condition," I said. Everyone leaned forward expectantly. "Next time, we skip the drama and go straight to the good stuff." The laughter that followed was genuine, warm, and full of the kind of hope that makes new traditions possible. But I still had one more surprise for them. The final surprise was waiting in my home office, printed and organized in a folder labeled Walsh Family Christmas 2025. "Before anyone leaves," I announced after our Christmas dinner, "I have something for Crystal." I handed her the folder, watching as she opened it with curious, slightly nervous fingers. Inside were detailed plans for next year's Christmas gathering. Location options, budget breakdowns, timeline templates, responsibility matrices, and contact information for local vendors and services. "What is this?" she asked, flipping through pages of charts and schedules. "It's a hospitality management toolkit," I explained. "Everything you need to actually plan and execute a family gathering without panic, assumptions, or last-minute chaos." Susan peered over her daughter's shoulder at the meticulously organized planning materials. "This is incredibly detailed. I spent my career in project management before I retired," I said. "Organizing large groups is just a skill like any other. It can be learned." Crystal was staring at the folder like I'd handed her the keys to the kingdom. You want me to plan next year? I want you to learn how to plan next year. There's a difference. David looked at the materials with obvious admiration. Mom, this is amazing. You could sell this kind of consulting service. I could, I agreed, but I'd rather teach it to family. Jenny was examining the budget templates. These are so thorough. Look, she's even included contingency planning for dietary restrictions and last-minute cancellations. The key, I explained, is thinking through every detail in advance instead of hoping things will work out. Hope is not a strategy. Crystal was reading through the timeline template, and I could see her brain starting to work in ways it hadn't before. This breaks everything down by month, starting in June. 6 months of planning for an 8-day event. That's how you avoid panic, I said. And how you avoid putting all the burden on the host. Henry was looking at the shared responsibility matrix. This distributes tasks among different family members. No one person is responsible for everything. Exactly. Rose managed Christmas for 40 years because she gradually took on more and more responsibility until it became entirely her job. But it doesn't have to work that way. Susan was nodding thoughtfully. This could actually work. If we all commit to our pieces, if we plan ahead, if we communicate properly. Big ifs, Brad pointed out. All the best family traditions start with big ifs, I replied. Crystal closed the folder and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Genuine respect mixed with gratitude. Margaret, I don't know how to thank you. For the planning materials, for hosting us despite everything, for teaching me how to do this right. Thank me by doing better next time, I said simply. David stood up and hugged me tightly. Mom, this has been the most educational Christmas I've had in years. Educational? I laughed. I learned that my wife needs more practice with planning, my family needs better communication skills, and my mother is much stronger than any of us realized. As the afternoon wound down and people started talking about departure times, the energy in the house was completely different from when they'd arrived. There was harmony where there'd been chaos, respect where there'd been assumption, cooperation where there'd been conflict. You know, Crystal said as she was packing her bags, I think Grandma Rose would have liked how this turned out. How do you figure? I asked. She always said the best lessons are the ones that stick. And this lesson is definitely going to stick. 3 hours later, as the last car pulled out of my driveway, I stood in my living room looking at the Christmas tree that would have been too big for one person, but had been perfect for 18. My phone buzzed with a text from Crystal. Already started planning for next year. You were right. Hope is not a strategy. I smiled, poured myself a glass of wine, and settled into my favorite chair overlooking the ocean. Sometimes the best Christmas presents are the ones you give yourself, like self-respect, clear boundaries, and the satisfaction of turning a disaster into a new family tradition. The waves rolled in steadily, washing the beach clean for tomorrow's possibilities, and I realized that at 72, I was still learning new ways to be exactly who I wanted to be. Outside, a pod of dolphins swam past my window, their synchronized movements reminding me that the best families are the ones that learn to work together instead of just hoping everything will work out. Next year was going to be very interesting indeed. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.